51st Citizen, and today we have the duo Eric and Bob, who are part of a group called Supercasanova. Would you please introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Eric Bonerz from Supercasanova, live from Los Angeles.
And this is Bob Remstein, and we're just holding it down here in the Tony Silvernates.
You have mentioned growing up in New Jersey, and I'm just kind of curious, I guess a question to your background, how it was growing up and at what point you got your start really in music.
All right, well, that's probably me. I was born outside of Philadelphia and then lived in sort of north central New Jersey for a while. And my start to music was we had a little dinky piano in the house, and when I was about 3, I sat on the piano bench and started plinking out notes, and my parents said, we got to do something about this. And I guess one of the things they could have done was prevented me, but went the other direction and got me some lessons pretty early on. And I don't know, I always had an interest.
So I'm from California. I was born in San Francisco. I've been in LA since the 60s, so a long time, Well, I think Bob was kind of a prodigy because at 3 years old, he was plinking out actual melodies. That's pretty impressive. I was opposite. I was more self-taught. I've never done good with lessons in any way. I never liked being taught. I like learning, but not being taught. So Bob and I are totally different. I'm self-taught, and I don't know how to read music, and I have trouble with chords and stuff, and Bob knows all of that backwards. So we're good.
What was some of the first music that both of you guys were listening to and just enjoying, that got you into it, sort of?
Well, for me, I remember probably when I was 3 years old, really liking the Beatles, and I've always liked the Beatles. But my mother tells a story that when I was 3 years old, she'd have company over, and she'd say, "Eric, put on a record," and I'd walk over to the stack, pull out a Hard Day's Night, while the company was looking, laughing, and put it on a turntable and up. So I've always really been into music. I remember looking at the speaker too, like a lot of people, and saying, "The Beatles they're miniaturized. They're like 4 little guys in the speaker," And I still have that speaker. I'm actually looking at it right now. I think the Beatles, you can't go wrong liking the Beatles to start off with when you're.
Sure.
Yeah, my folks were a little on the older side, so they rock for the antithesis of music. But I got some experience with classical early on and also Broadway musicals. And then one day when I was about 6, my mom came home with a pair of Burt records, and that completely did it for me. I was bowled over by the Burt Bacharach stuff. These were not the Dionne Warwick, ones. These were the versions. And I just loved stuff. A number of years later, maybe when I was 15, the first LP I can remember was Steely Dan Asia, of all things. So yeah, I definitely always had sort of an odd collection piece, but this stuff, certain things just grab me, and that's.
Yeah, that's something that's different about upbringing. My parents, were into the Beatles, and my dad really liked jazz. So I had to find easy listening, Martin Denny. My dad hated Martin, and he hated, I don't think he liked Burt Bacharach. So it was, a lot of people get into it by looking at Dad's record collection when they're in college and finding easy listening and liking it. My dad didn't have any of it.
You mentioned a little bit of jazz in there. I think there was a video of you guys I found. You were performing Miles Davis's "So What" at an awards banquet or something along those lines. I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about, is jazz a big influence on you guys? Do you feel it to be waned a little bit, or is it still a big influence on you?
Well, yeah, I mean, each of us kind of came at it differently. I don't think I was actually drawn to jazz, but my experience going back to high school was that if you wanted to do something other than, marching band, that was the best thing you could get. And so I got into it, and that exposed me to a lot of things in that way. It also sort of demanded that I be able to play things like that. And I continued on with that in college and so forth. I would say I am into a lot of different kinds of music, and when I'm standing there in the batter's box, you know what? It doesn't matter what pitch comes my way. I want to be able to make it work, hit it back, to put my spin on it. So jazz is kind of one of the elements that's there, in my lyrics. Eric, I think, came at it from a slightly different standpoint, but.
My dad was really into bebop, so when I was a kid, I didn't like it, I mean, the stuff I liked was the other stuff he liked, but bebop was too intense, My dad would go see all those guys. There's nobody he hasn't seen multiple times. So it wasn't until later. The thing that's really cool about jazz is it sounds great, but as a musician, just playing jazz is great, and it loosens you up. And so when I started my band in college, or was in a band in college, I started doing a lot of, jazzy parts. It's just, I don't think Bob and I are real full jazz guys, but we can fake it with some. And I think that's important, because some people, if you get stuck in rock and that's all you can do, you're just limited. Jazz is like a whole field, and a lot of the songs we do, they're not jazz, but they have jazzy elements,
On a pure jazz basis, it's dwindled to a great extent, and yet the ingredients of jazz get used all the time, and being able to do that, there's always a reaction that people have, because it's like, oh, that's something just interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point that you bring up, because while there are like a lot of elements of jazz that do come up in modern music, like the improvisational element, which is, so central to jazz, and what makes it so, what I would assume makes it fun to play with people, kind of, it's not very prevalent in modern pop music at all. So I don't know. In a way, it's kind of a shame, but I guess it's just a cycle thing. I'm sure at some point it'll come back.
Yeah, well, also with a lot of the music today, they're playing to backing tracks. We do that too. We play the tracks, and you can't improvise too much when at this point you have to do this part.
Sure.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think the quality of musicianship's going down. I've been to a couple recently, and it's like the people, they know how to play, but they don't have a spark. They don't have like that extra something that makes them special. It's just like they're playing parts,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's because the music's getting simplified, or I just haven't seen, I mean, there's still a great player, don't get me wrong. The idea of what a good player is, I think, is getting done.
Yeah. I think it's partially, while, using computers and music, electronic music, that sort of a thing, certainly opens a lot of creative doorways, because it allows you to do so many things, in or whatever. It certainly does make it a lot more difficult to have a lot of spontaneity in a live performance. So that sort of thing.
Yeah.
A musician I follow, his name's George Clanton. In the last few years, he's really kind of blown up. And I don't know that I would necessarily call it improvisation, but one thing that is really to appreciate about him for me is really his live performances. He knows how to really, what you're talking about with that spark, he knows how to really energize the crowd.
Yeah, no, there are people are starting to actually, when they do electronic shows, make the music live. They write the beat on stage, and they make the song live, and they're so good at it, they can do it. And that's so much better than hitting start and twisting a couple knobs. So I think, people say the music's over. No, I think you just got to figure out a way to make it cool again, And yes, there are people who know how to play electronics live, and it really can be as exciting as watching somebody play guitar if they know how to do it well.
Yeah, definitely. one thing that I've noticed in a lot of the album music to shop by is while there are a lot of motifs from like 60s lounge and pop and that sort of thing, there's also like sometimes these acid house synths, I guess I would call it. I'm assuming it's the stylophone, the icon on Bandcamp, or some sort of synth. So what do you find interesting about taking those sort of old influences, those very particular, 60s lounge influences, and sort of doing, adding more of an electronic spin to it, adding more synth textures, adding all?
Well, I mean, a lot of those songs start off with samples from records that you can probably tell that. And then, I always felt like a lot of the people who sample, they didn't get enough music on top. They get one sample and have it go 5 minutes. So I was like, let's make some songs out of it. Let's get real musicians on top of it. And I also didn't want to just use all acoustic instruments, because then it wouldn't sound like I did anything, or we did anything. The point was we took old and added something new and made it something unique, So in my mind, you have to almost add electronic stuff to it, Well, plus, yeah, that was kind of the same. People like Demetrius in Paris and, Fantastic Plastic, they were kind of doing the thing. So it's, plus, in the early 2000s, it was a hip genre,
Yeah.
The problem was our record came out in 2004 only in Japan. And it came out like at the tail end, So we were like one of the last, of those records. And had it come out 4 years earlier, I think it would have been a whole different ballgame.
That kind of era, I think there's really starting to become a real strong interest, as a lot of people who either grew up in the mid-90s or remember at least some of that. There's, I feel, a resurgence in interest in late 90s techno and big beat and all those kind of genres. So I think it's definitely coming back, which is encouraging.
Well, yeah, I hope so,
Yeah, I will add one thing here, and I think it's important in order to understand the Supercasanova, the musical concept really is Eric's. Eric is the one who created that, and he was originally partnered up with a fellow called Millionaire, from Combustible, and I was brought in to add keyboard parts on the first CD, and I bowled over by what I was heard and what I was asked to do. I was just completely into it, and it was a great creative challenge for me to do. You were talking about, keyboard parts and things like that. There's a great deal of arranging going on, but there's also all sorts of room to improvise, and that was part of what I loved about it right off the bat, was that I was given this amazing combination and told, see what you can put in here. Just after that was finished, Millionaire went off to get on some more film scoring stuff. He ultimately hopped in and became Eric's partner. So in a way, I was given, combinations, and then asked to see what I could throw into it.
On the topic of samples and that sort of thing, and just a lot of the source material that you use, definitely not necessarily the way you use it, but the source material that you use in terms of samples reminds me definitely of the Avalanches, just because a lot of that sort of 60s pop with those vocal samples that sound very much like things out of 60s radio shows. I don't know, I just sort of maybe assumed that there was an Avalanches influence.
I've heard Avalanches since then, but yeah, I don't know if the even first record was out when we were making ours. But if you get a sample, I mean, in my mind, some of the best samples are the 60s samples, And I think that's why sometimes the stuff sounds similar, because those are the best ones. You don't want to use popular stuff. I mean, I will say Dimitri from Paris was an influence. That record just seemed to speak to me and say, I gotta do something like that. I was already doing it on my own, but that got me. And the group Fantastic Plastic Machine also. Their stuff was so well put together, that I really wanted to make our stuff really tight and well put like those guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that definitely, even though there is the similarity in the sample material between you and the Avalanches, definitely you guys a lot more just electronic on top of it, because Avalanche is, at least most of the stuff of theirs that I've heard, is almost entirely sample based, and it's just layering different samples, whereas I think you guys, you'll get one or two or three samples and then you start building your own song, just record it as far as synth, electronic elements, whatever else. So I feel like there's definitely an appeal to what the Avalanches do, but to me I think it's a little more interesting, and just the electronic part, like you were saying, sounds different and contrasts with it. So that's something I really.
I mean, Avalanche are doing something right, because they're popular,
Yeah, sure.
I am a fan of this record, a group called the Avalanche from the 60s, 1963. That's where they got their name from. It's got a lot of the Wrecking Crew. Hal Blaine's the drummer, and Tommy Tedesco. Anybody who's into that record is cool by my book. And that's like the first record that uses distorted guitar that I read. It's from 1963, which anybody says is the first fuzz guitar on record. So, and nobody knows the Avalanche record, but yeah, you guys should look for it. I think it may even be on Spotify.
Man, that's crazy. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
I have a big record collection too that helped my sample, because I didn't want to get sued. We didn't pay for any of the samples, Mm-hmm. I just said, we'll just use such obscure samples that nobody's going to sue,
Yeah.
And the bottom line is nobody's suing.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
I think so. People warning me, "You're not doing it," as if I was like walking into a fire pit. I was like, no, I'm just putting out a record with samples that aren't clear. But people were really, I mean, no, it didn't make a lot of money, so I think you can only sue for money made. But
yeah,
it's still interesting. I would still do it today. I still believe that that are obscure enough and you sample them intelligently enough, you're not going to get. Plus, at this point, I've forgotten where they come from. I'll be listening to a record and I'll go, oh my God, that's what I got that sample from. Then I conveniently just forget about it, because if you don't know it, it's even easier.
I feel like maybe this question won't work now. I was going to ask you, what are some of your favorite samples that you've used over the years? But
there are a lot of vocal samples too. Instead of having singing, we had vocals, and those can be even harder to get good with, because everybody's looking for those.
Yeah.
And we did pretty good. We would get, we got, I don't know if you know who Paul Frees is. He's a voiceover. He does the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland and Disney, the Pillsbury Doughboy. And we got some real good Paul Frees in there, but stuff that nobody else had ever used.
On the album In a Space, like just a lot of those samples, like anti-drug PSAs. Yeah, it's definitely quite a vibe that is.
Yeah, no,
and I've heard that, a lot in recent.
Yeah, no, that was the hip thing to do, is to get drug quotes. Everybody liked drug quotes.
Well, it works pretty well on a lot of them.
Yeah, booze is the only answer. Yeah, no, I'm really proud of that. It took a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
It really did. I don't know if it sounds like it, but that was, tedious, months, probably about a year for each record.
Do you remember what year In a Space came out? Because I think on the Bandcamp it says 2010, but I'm not sure if that's just like the year that it went up on Bandcamp or if that's the actual year it came out.
Yeah, it never really came out. You know,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what happened. We made the first record for a Japanese label, and you know, it was one of the best labels in Japan. And in Japan, it was in all the stores, and they liked it. So I said, "Hey, we're working on it." I said, "Oh, great, we want to hear it." So I finished, and then I happened to be in Paris right when the owner of the record label was going to be in Paris too. So this is great. I'll meet him in Paris, give him the CD of a new record. He's going to fall in love. And I met him. Never got back. I mean, not even we don't like it. I mean, and if he did, I'd block it out. In fairness, I don't think the record company put out after that. But you know, it was interesting that because what I try to do is just make the same record again, just different. You know, I wasn't like, we're gonna do a concept here. It was, let's do the same. And I don't know, Inner Space compared to Eternity now, I think they're pretty similar, but maybe Inner Space is darker and more moving. I don't know, but
I think Inner Space has a little more complexity to it, and there's definitely some things on there that are a little odder than generally what Eternity now. And yet there's also several tracks on there that are really pop and catchy. I think immediately grab anyone to it. So you know, it's hard to say with this stuff.
But actually, in answer to your question too, so it never really did come out. You know, we just put the camp because we figured somebody should hear it.
Well, yeah, at very least it's accessible to anybody, and you know, we sell copies there, and also those tracks are available, you know, in TV and that sort of thing, and occasionally they get, you know, they get made use of for various shows.
Is most of your not modern, but in the past few years, has most of your work been for TV shows and that sort of a thing?
You know, there's no music business anymore. You know, in terms of putting records in, especially for someone like ours. So we luckily started doing libraries. It's called library music. Library music. At least you can make some money off your music that way. You know, and it gets used on some weird. There's a show called Impractical. It's probably the worst show on TV, and they use our music all the time, and I can't even sit through one episode. And it's fun on TV, but it's so horrible. What other shows have used it?
Well, we've, you know, occasionally sports highlights.
Oh yeah, NFL for films have used it, right?
Yeah, we've had some cool stuff like that. I think
Monday Night Football used it once.
What was that one? There was a soap opera that used.
Yeah, like Days of Our Lives.
Yeah,
used it.
that actually made tracks. And the thing is, you know, that's kind of fun just to see it because you get a statement every 3 months, and all across the world, these things are getting used, you know, in ways that we would never be able to know about. I mean, that in and of itself is fascinating to see. Oh look, Australia did this. Oh, look, Finland is playing that. Oh, Japan's doing a radio, you know.
Yeah, it's tons of different countries, you know.
Yeah.
What every once in a while you'll be watching TV and you'll just hear your song as a fluke. You don't know what's going on. Like let's say once every 10 years, but that's
yeah, I'd imagine
because
that's a good feeling.
That's our music. And I was watching Inside the NFL once, and they came on. They used it at the end, and it's like one of the greatest days of my life. I love football, and just so that can be. At least the music's out there. You know, you work hard. And
yeah, it's interesting that's kind of the changing face of the music industry now. It's much less an album thing because, like, even in the 80s or something, I think Michael Jackson owned this library music label called Music Library.
I've got a lot of Brutons, yeah. Bruton, yeah.
Bruton, yeah. It's interesting just because, like, it's not necessarily that many of those individual tracks are famous, but like still made a good bit of money off that, I'd imagine, off his investment there.
Well, what's interesting too is like something like the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme, that was just a song written 20 years before the show, and they just picked it, and everybody calls it, that's a error, but that's now considered the Curb Your Enthusiasm. but that was just a track. There's other examples. Every once in a while, a library track, will break out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing about library is maybe in 20 years, our sound may come back, so they can just have live. What I'm saying is, library music never dies.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 60s stuff can use for 60s stuff, and the 70s stuff can use for 70s. But I didn't know Michael Jackson owned they did some really.
Yeah, I think he owned it from 1982, and then I think he sold it like 3 years later in 1995. But definitely, do you have any advice, would you say, for somebody who's a young musician or an aspiring musician, someone just getting into it, wants to make some money off of library tracks, that sort of a thing? Is it more just of a, sit and cross your fingers and hope somebody uses it, or a way to maximize your chances of being successful with that?
No, I mean, we've made a lot of tracks, but the only chance you really have of selling it is to sell it to a library company. A lot of the tracks we have, probably 20 tracks out there that are co-owned by us and another company. But these companies are like Warner Music or BMG, so that you need to make good music, and then you need to sell it to somebody who will get it out there. Because if you just have a website and say, "Hey, library music," yeah, you'll get some internet use, but you really want TV. So it's like anything. You have to have a way to sell it. Learn to make good library tracks. Listen to old library, and then put your own. I'm sure Bob too.
Yeah. I mean, I would add just that there are various conferences and things where you can go and make a point of meeting these people. It's a bit of a crapshoot. I mean, there's no way in that, but
that's all right.
There are, I mean, for an easy example, and it's a fun one, there was a period back then, maybe 10 years ago, where I was making a point of going to more of those, and I was standing in line at the end of the day to talk to somebody at one of these places, and there was a tall, very attractive blonde woman with an interesting look about her, and she seemed to be pushing her stuff, and I got into a chat with her, and it turns out a singer and a model and a former beauty pageant, originally from. How do how often have chatted a bit? She seemed to think some of what I was talking about was interesting, and we traded not. And later, and this is really, there hasn't been a way to, but we created a tune that was meant to be a vocal track, and we wound up having her do some singing on it. She was the right person to bring in. We needed someone with a bit of an Eastern European accent to do a kind of a spoken middle. That was quite a tale going off in the right direction, but
that's all right.
It was through one of those conferences that I bumped into her, and she turned out to be, kind of the right choice. That kind of thing, you never know what connections you can make. On a certain level, you got to sit at home and do your thing, but you also have to get out there and make friends, who then can become a fan and want to do more with what you're.
Yeah, definitely a lot to be said for making connections in general.
You guys mentioned 60s music, and I was wondering if there was any kind of like 90s groups that influenced you.
I'm trying to think in the 90s, I mean, who I was in, I've always been in just listening to the old music too, so like, I've just always never been into too many of the new bands, but I'm sure we actually probably missed a lot of great stuff. I was actually pretty into hip hop in the 90s also. I thought that was a real high point for kind of music. Late 80s, early 90s, so, and plus they did a lot of sampling too, so I remember the first time I realized you could sample a whole groove, because I used to just sample little parts. I had a little sample in the early 80s, and I was, but you could sample a whole groove, and you can learn from. But Bob, there must be some band you like
Yeah, I'm trying fishing in my mind. This one that's coming to my mind from the early '90s for sure. The group, darn it, my brain is just not coming up with it.
I will tell you who I did like was bands like the High Llamas. I thought Stereolab was a neat take on that '60s music too. You know.
Yeah. And in fact, during that era, as they were kind of being a sonic tweaky thing to starting to really figure out how to do it musically, as it got towards the end of the '90s, they had some great stuff. I don't think I want to say this was a group that was may have been on 4AD or something like that, but better. I'm trying to think. Doggone it, is this British? Maybe it was a duo, and they were kind of a much more hardcore electronic thing, and then started heading more towards kind of lounge. Yeah, but if you want to throw a few more names, we'll see if maybe that'll get us.
Well, I was gonna say like Propeller Heads or what's the other one? The Chemical Brothers, Thievery.
I kind of like Crystal Method. My brother did some of their record covers, and I thought they kind of, if you've got pure electronic, I like them, and I like the early Fatboy Slim, the early stuff before it got, with too many vocals.
And didn't Propeller Heads do that one? It was like a takeoff on a James Bond thing.
Yeah, history repeating.
Yeah, that worked pretty well.
That's a real.
Yeah.
That's a good sample too. I don't know what they sampled for that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they looped it. And said, okay, we got a hit here, right?
Yeah.
Because that's all you need, Is that You
mentioned about your vinyl record collection earlier. How do you approach like music production in terms of grabbing a sample, finding the right beat? Do you go through like a lot of records, or is it like you just kind of pick one by kind of random process and just automatically know the groove and can do it like that? Or
no way to work like that. No, I mean, it can be two ways. But what I have post-its all over the place, and every time I listen to a record, if I hear a loop, I write on a post-it. A1 is the first song inside A. I'll write A1, then I'll write intro loop. You're never gonna be able to remember. So I got 1,000 of post-its all over my records. But sometimes, especially when I was younger, I'd hear a loop and I'd immediately have to go upstairs and make it loop it. Like it was so, like I couldn't wait 5 seconds to hear it looped. I'm an older person now, so now I just make the post-it note. Difficult because it's not like, hey, I know these two are going to work together. You try the other, and if that doesn't work, you try another. And that's why I don't think a lot of people do much. Is it's a pain in the ass. Hey, any note you want, that's much easier in some ways than being forced to play along to a sample. But if any of us have for samplers, is just put post-its on. If somebody's smart to be able to also write down what key it was in or something, I just write good.
Part of what's cool about working with that kind of stuff and the way that we had the chance to do it is that it isn't always the case that, let's say, two samples line up perfectly together, but sometimes what they create is certain thing works great, another thing creates a bit of a mush. And it's a little bit the job of the live parts to kind of make them. And sometimes, because of a peculiar thing that comes off the combination, it inspires whatever happens next in the process. So it's a trail to follow. Where are you going next? What's that? And so it isn't. I don't think that there's usually we know exactly what we're aiming for and let's do it. It's more like, let's see what this combination brings out, and that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way we worked is we put all the samples in first. So once the songs were totally done, there's almost no room for anything else, For me, I would get excitement with hearing the initial loop and say, I'm going to make a song with that, But I don't know never was able to. I may have heard a vocal sample and go, oh my God, that's going to be great, but.
Maybe some sort of just momentary things. I think the grooves tend to be put together at the outset, but I think sometimes later we got it going and almost feels like a little punctuation here or there, and sometimes Eric would have the perfect to slide in there and just give it an extra bump.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll continue our interview with you folks.
All right, thanks.
Great.
She's beautiful. She's stylish. Incredible. Stupendous. Fantastic. Sensational. What else can I tell you? She is dynamite. Fantastic. Beautiful. Sensational. And she'll explode on the network TV scene this June. Perfectly timed for little girls to fall in love with her. What else can I tell you? She is dynamite. Beautiful. Now you know why she's called Dynamite.
Okay.
So you're back on there, just asking about other 90s electronic. I mentioned Thievery Corporation.
I'll tell you, one thing I'll say about the Supercasanova records is the samples are really tight. They work with the rhythm perfectly. They're never a smidgen. I thought Thievery fudged the tightness of the samples. Sometimes the beats would get too loose, and the whole point of working with samples has got to be tight, at least. So, they were much more popular than we were and did a better job. I'm sure nice people. I felt like some of the stuff wasn't crafted, well enough, but you have to realize it's easy to get bitter when you do music.
Well,
That was me talking. I'm not saying Bob. That was me.
Yeah, and actually, I'll throw in. I'm just looking at a list of '90s electronic here. One obvious one that certainly grabbed me when it came out, and Air actually created a combination in their particular, French stylings. But that was something that I think definitely grabbed me at that time. And maybe that's just as a keyboardist, I lean more in that direction.
Yeah, I forgot Air for a second, but yeah, Moon Safari, right? Was this the big album they did? Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean there with the French.
What did you think about Daft Punk?
I love Daft Punk. I think they're really. To me, I think that's just it. A lot of those when they've distilled the song to the basic elements beautifully. Big fan.
All right, and I have an almost the same take on it. I loved the first album, which is funny because that kind of hardcore stripped down electronica is not usually what I go for, but I thought that just friggin' nailed it right on. I thought that was a great album. The second one, which has many more fans, to me I thought was a bit of a easy, if only we throw in some disco elements, people will like us. But still well done. It just, to me, it didn't grab me.
They might be putting a new record out.
Is that true?
Well, it's been almost 5
years. Yeah, you're right.
They're the kind of group that they don't say, we're working on a new record. They just, here it is.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe I'm just kind of hoping, because I thought the last one was so polished. It was good, but it was too polished. I have a feeling the new record might be a little.
Yeah. Was Random Access Memories the last one, or have they done one since then? Yeah. Yeah, I kind of agree. I feel like a lot of the, I mean, it's hard to like, it's hard to dislike some of the, like Get Lucky or whatever, just because it's just like, fun song or whatever. But at the same time, a little too much disco to the point where it didn't even feel like they were putting their own spin on disco. It just felt like they were playing disco.
Yeah, exactly. But they kind of, yeah. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it works. But yeah, I'm in your.
How did you feel about? There's been a couple collaborations between Kanye West and Daft Punk throughout. You familiar with those at all? How did you, if you are, how did you feel about it? Kind of curious.
Yeah, I only know about it because the Daft Punk documentary.
Mm.
I'll tell you, I just try to live my life without any knowledge of Kanye West. I mean, I think I know one song he did, but it's just like I don't listen to the radio, so I just like I almost have an opinion. I mean, he seems like kind of a turkey, just kind of. I know nothing about Jay-Z, but Jay-Z seems so much cooler. Something about just for me, just seems.
Yeah, as a personality, he's definitely a little over the.
But I have heard his music. People do say he's musically talented. So having not heard it, I don't want to say he's not.
Mm.
Because then you get our co-hosts angry at you.
Oh, another host who's been on some of the episodes, Kwaku is a real big fan of Kanye West. But I would say appeals to me personally about Kanye West is not him as a person or as an artist, but more as like an Andy Warhol figure. Like he kind of just builds a great group of artists. He may not be doing a lot of the work, but the networking and the putting the whole thing together is. I feel like that's his talent, personally.
Yeah,
that's how I've always.
He definitely has talent. So wait, I have a question for you. How old?
I'm only 17. I almost said 16.
You're 17 years old.
Yeah, I'm 22.
Wow, you guys are really young.
Right.
Well, you guys got a head start. At least I'd probably like Kanye West if I was your age too. I'm 54 years old, and Bob's the same age. So, that's interesting. Well, it's interesting. I think I'm even more impressed with you guys because you're so young, and I think a lot of music inspiration is learning stuff, and you guys are getting a good head start. It seems like by talking to some geniuses like us, you're getting a real head start.
Yeah, no, it's really enlightening for us. We talked with Neil Pogue, who's mixed a lot of R&B, hip hop, and he's done stuff for Earth, Wind, and Fire. That was a really amazing and surreal kind of experience for me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the group, R&B group TLC. They had a big hit in the late 90s, Waterfalls, and it was really interesting talking to his take on it. So, I mean, this podcast for me so far is just really, it's a learning experience on both ends, because I get to talk with people that are like around my age who are just coming up, and on the other side of it, talking to people who've been in the business, like you guys, and kind of have your own interesting stories to share.
So along those lines, again, as I said, when I was in college and for a while after that, I did a good bit of music journalism. So interesting to bring up something like Earth, Wind, and Fire. Lucky enough to sit down for an hour in a room with Maurice White when he put out his solo album in the mid-'80s. Wow. And although that's not generally considered to be a great album, it's interesting, peculiar in some way. But I can say he was one of the greatest people I ever talked to. He was a gentleman, a guy who already, because I was lucky enough to see Earth, Wind, and Fire tour. This would have been maybe when Let's Groove came out. They were amazing. And I thought, wow, these concerts that I'm just starting to go to must be great. Yeah, it was about one of the 5 best I ever saw. It just happened to be like off on the high end. But he was just a true gentleman in every sense. Extremely nice man, thoughtful, spoken, helping me out because I was sort of like, hi, I'm a college guy, I don't really know yet. And he just the best. Yeah. I'll throw one other good story for you because this one I think you'll appreciate if you remember it. You guys, Don was.
I'm not
These are
familiar
young people,
personally.
Bob.
All right, you might not know, yeah. Don was a pretty well-known producer over the years, but maybe starting a while back. He used to be the co-head of a group from the 80s, kind of a peculiar band out of Detroit called Was. And they started out early 80s being a kind of a peculiar sort of electronic punkish group, and then deciding that they were going to work horns and other stuff in and take some Detroit soul along with them. Actually, they did that. In fact, late 80s, they had their one hit with a song called Walk the Door, which is pretty fun, kind of a neo soul little. And they were a great live band, and they definitely did some fun stuff. And Don and his partner Dave, who were, despite their both having the last name of Was, were not actually related. Yeah, Don. They came up with that because Donald's full name was Donald Fagenson. If that rings.
That Steely Dan?
Well, right.
There you go.
See, so Donald Fagen, already well known for a decade. If you come along and your name is Donald Fagenson,
Yeah, it's
trouble. So
like David
so
Bowie or whatever.
So the other guy's name was David Weiss, and that's where I guess they came up with Was to be Don Was and David Was. Anyway, on that second album, they had some guest vocalists they managed to bring in, which was pretty cool for a group that hadn't achieved that much yet, other than being just kind of interesting. And they managed to pull in Ozzy Osbourne to be guest vocalist, and Doug Feiger back, and now Mel Tormé. Basically you look back at old, great jazz vocalists, and you tend to think of Sinatra among the guys and Ella Fitzgerald among the women, and everybody else line. If you start with Sinatra and you start lining up the next couple of guys, you're probably going to go to Bennett and pretty much Mel Tormé. After that, everybody else has to line. And Tormé, in ways, was an amazing scat singer and was is credited with co-writing the Christmas song. So, I mean, that's kind of an amazing. He wound up getting asked to be a guest vocalist on this thing, and I wound up asking them years later how. So now I got to set this up for you. I covered Mel Tormé in a show that he did at UCLA at the Royce Hall. He had the Peter Nero Trio as his opening group. And I had him as a vocalist as part of shows in the Hollywood Bowl a few years earlier than that. He was always great. An amazing scat singer, and he always just was a craft. The one I saw a few years later at that show in college was like another notch and a half better. That was an amazing show. And I sat down and I wrote up my review and turned it in, and it got published, and gets to the end of, that was maybe October, gets to the middle of December, and I'm done with finals, and I should have gone home, but for some reason I wander into the newspaper office, and I'm just like, let's see if there's any new LP up front. Bob, here's the call for him. It's Mel Tormé.
Wow.
I go up there. I'm like, someone's playing a trick. Oh, hi, Bob. This is Mel Tormé. It was Mel Tormé. He called me at the college newspaper office to thank me for giving him a grant.
Oh, man.
Wow.
You know what? I do about 300 shows a year, and about every 4 months I get a chance to catch up. My manager hands me reviews, and I feel it's appropriate. I call someone. I thank them. That's what he did. And in the conversation, at one point, he says to me, and Bob, you've got a marker out on me. I'm like, what is, I'm trying to think of what he means by this. Basically, you think of something you need, you let me know, and I'll put it together for you. So, like, wow, yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? Well, the trouble is I couldn't think of what to do with it. But I wanted to find out a few years later how it was that this oddball group out of Detroit managed to get Mel Tormé to sing on their song, which is, by the way, the song they wrote for him is called Zaz Turned Blue. It's an amazing track. Check it out if you can find it. It is both a spoof of a great jazz ballad and a great jazz ballad. So I'm interviewing David, and David was more the lyric guy. He had been a jazz writer for the L.A. Herald Examiner, and he says, "Yeah, well, you know what's funny? I saw Mel Tormé in a concert, and he was amazing, and I wrote a great review, and a couple months later, I got a phone call from him. Oh my God!" And he goes on and he says, "Yeah, and at one point he said to me," and I interrupt him. I said, "You marker out on me." He's like, "How the hell did you know that?" I told him my story. He's like, "Wait a minute." He runs down the hallway. This, by the way, this was at Conway Studios because Don was at that moment producing Bob's album, and they were taking a break to do interviews. Goes down the hallway, grabs Don and yanks him down the hallway, and he says, "Listen to this," and makes me tell him the same story. And they're just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." Basically, they called it, and they said, "We're going to write a songs for you. If you're willing to sing it, let's do it." That's what happened, and that's how that song.
That's a pretty crazy story. A pretty interesting sequence. I mean, just I don't know, just all the things that had to fall into place for that to happen. That's pretty interesting.
In the pre-internet age, where it was much harder to get in touch with, big name artists like that, where I expect them to even, give you a second glance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that was one of the things, again, my sense was, whatever else he might do when he's performing and rehearsing and whatever else, listen, I always thought he was great when I saw him perform. But the fact that he was thoughtful enough to do that was, I thought, man, I tip my cap to him. That was on the high end, so.
Moving back a bit, I suppose, just talking in a more general sense about smooth jazz and easy listening and that sort of thing. More easy listening than smooth jazz. Do you guys have any favorite easy listening records or artists that you, maybe not things you've sampled, because like we were saying, that might be sticky.
No, I'm not. We like a lot of stuff. I mean, it's, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, obviously, the Giants easy listening would be like something like Handy Mancini,
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a huge category, I don't know how much you know, but then there's the whole Exotica thing, this and that.
Like Martin Denny, yeah.
Martin, I mean, that's kind of Martin Denny is kind of how I got into all this weirder music, was Martin Denny and Nina Rota. Nina Rota did the music to the Fellini movies, all the Fellini movies, and it's just great music, And when you hear Nina Rota, you'll be, oh my God, that was copied, but it's a style that you young kids will know. You when you hear, you go, oh, that kind of music. Bob mentioned Burt Bacharach, and one thing I mentioned that we're both into, especially me, is the Italian people like Ennio Morricone.
Yeah.
I heard that name.
Yeah. Morricone is great.
And there's so many other guys that are just some of the greatest stuff you've ever heard. Definitely, it's easy to listen. Kind of taken to another genre.
Yeah, guys like Morricone really impress me because, by the nature of having to work with a soundtrack, doing a movie, there's so many different varieties of emotions and genres that you kind of have to be proficient in. And he definitely.
Yeah, he's probably the best in the world at it, Still alive, he won an Academy Award a couple of years ago, the last Tarantino. I'm not a huge Tarantino fan, but I like the fact that Tarantino has really championed Morricone, He's always talking about how great he is. I think that's, he deserves it. But there's a lot of other guys, too. If you just there's, I don't know, like if you Spotify or something like that, there's a lot of great Italian soundtrack music that I have a feeling you guys would like. Let me just give you a few names, because that Piero Piccioni, Piccioni, Piero Piccioni. You can't go wrong. Just if you just anything of his by the '60s, you know, his stuff's been used by the Coen brothers and stuff too. Go from there, but Piccioni is like this a good way to go after Morricone. But there's great Morricone. You know, I'm sure you know the good and the bad. But he did 300, 400 movies. There's so much Morricone. In fact,
yeah, I watched at least part of, I believe it was one of Sergio Leone's last movies, Once Upon a Time in America, and I thought the music on that was great too.
yeah, and you know, in that movie, the characters are actually playing the instrument. I playing an ocarina at one point, and yeah, no, that was the last Sergio Leone, as you said, and but yeah, the guy's the guy's super talented.
Going back on the point of improvisational, what do you guys think about Frank Zappa's stuff? Because he kind of ran the gamut, I feel like, in music genre. I mean, obviously he had a lot to do with progressive rock, but I mean, there's clearly a lot of jazz and other influences there. I'm just kind of curious, like, what you guys thought about Frank Zappa.
I always felt about Zappa is people who couldn't play their instruments very well and were in bands were very critical of Zappa. They would say they're too good at their instrument, you know, and it doesn't have any life. And it's like, I felt like that was just them validating their poor musicianship. I'm not saying I love Zappa, but down the musicianship of it. Put music. I don't like that song. But to say that they played too well is stupid, you know? Go to a classical concert. The band was too tight. So I've always felt that, you know, and I think, you know, there's some great, like, over, you know, the mid-'70s stuff's my favorite, you know.
Uh-huh.
I was more into, you know, Beef was a little weirder, and, you know. But yeah, there's a real anti-Zappa thing that goes around in the music that I never, I'm like, you hate the Osmonds and you hate Frank Zappa. It's like, I like the Osmonds, I like Frank Zappa.
I can add a little bit to that in that before I met Eric in the late early 90s, I co-led a rock band in town that probably in some weird way combined styles of Peter Gabriel and Steely Dan, which in some ways was great and in other ways was kind of the reason probably why it only lasted for did. But the guy I co-led it with had been part of Zappa's band for about months. He was a few years older than me. Back in the mid-'70s, I think playing like percussion, you know, vibes or xylophone or whatever it was.
I see.
And so that influence was there for him, and you know, on a certain level of just sheer, oh my God, all those things are happening in that music. I can't believe anybody would think to do it. It's amazing. Yeah. There's also a little bit of a level, or more than a little bit for me, that it's sort of like, man, a little of those ideas could have gone away. So, you know, it varies. There are tracks that are really cool and other tracks that it's kind of like, oh no, that's, you're over the top again. It's a challenge, and it's something that, you know, music can be too simple and too boring, but it can also be too much. So it's kind of a balance.
But yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing with Zappa is he did so much stuff, and I mean, between not only did he do so many different things, but he did such a variety of complexities of things. I mean, some of it obviously was super complex, but also a lot of it was, you know, tasteful and to the point and not too over the top. I mean, he just did he did everything.
And really interesting too when he talks, he's one of the most eloquent people talking about music and his music. You know,
Yeah.
some guys go, "Oh, well," and he's just like laid it out perfectly. He's one of the most interesting people to hear talk. You know, he didn't drink, and he just drank coffee all the time. Oh, smoked cigarettes too. I think he smoked cigarettes.
I was going to ask, in regards to your project, Supercasanova, has there been any plans to put out any kind of new material? Because in your Bandcamp, the stuff seems kind of, seems like older releases, and I'm just wondering if it's something that, first off, you plan on adding more stuff to the Bandcamp catalog, and two, do you have any, like, ideas or plans or hopes in the future to collaborate with other artists?
Yeah, we you know, what happened with the second record, you know, it ends up costing money to make the record because you got to pay musicians, you know, and then when nothing happens with it, you know, I mean, it was kind of disheartening, to be honest, you know. So then we're doing the library stuff. Doesn't really get released, you know, you really even can't be released. And we got in that mode, and, you know, I'm just getting the studio after a little hiatus back together. I just showed Bob at the break. So, yeah, it'd be great to get back to doing it. Bob and I have worked together for so long that do it quick, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it can happen pretty fast, but, so yeah, we'll never say never.
A number of different things, and so yeah, some of it is a juggling act of finding the time and the specific project to work on. But yeah, we'll see. There'll be stuff.
And just the fact that two young kids like you are into our stuff, we got to get back.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Give it new credit.
Yeah, well, and you know, we would be happy to throw you any kind of collaborate when you're at that level, when you're ready. We'd be happy to throw you any kind of collaborations your way, getting artists for you, because that's what this podcast is all. We really want to reach artists and kind of build bridges for them to be able to collaborate. So basically, I think we've discussed a lot on this. I really enjoyed talking with you guys. I just kind of like to wrap it up with if there's anything like on social media you would like to shout out, or any friends you would like to shout out, now's the time to do that, and we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you. No, I would just say, you know, listen, there's a lot of music out there, and I think the resurgence of vinyl is great for two reasons. One, they're putting out new versions of Miles Davis records, but there's also more used record stores. And used record stores is where you can go in there and spend $1 and just find a gem, you know, that will change your life, you know. And I think that used records is really cool. And, you know, where you guys are, I can only imagine the great records waiting to be bought. My shout is buy records, you know, and especially used, you know, because the fact that the kids are buying them now and the records haven't stopped being bought since the 50s. Turntables easily 50 years from now, easily to get, because everybody likes records, you know. So when you guys are 60, you're going to want to have a turntable. So records aren't anywhere, you know. One of the great. So there you go.
And my shout out, I guess, would be, it's too often the case with, let's say, older musicians that I work with, that they wind up becoming more and more limited. There's certain things they like, and they're kind of like, well, you know, I do it because I have to, and so forth. I feel just the opposite. I am more excited about stuff now than ever. Just let me at it, you know, stick me in front of a keyboard and go. So sense is keep your mind open, keep listening to things, check out what else is there, and keep growing, because there's music is fascinating.
That's some very sound advice. Well, again, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate all the wisdom you share with us and just your kind of perspective. And that's this episode of World Movers Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you next week. This has been DJ Angel Fire and my co-host, 51st Citizen. See you next week.